So Carlos, on the IMDb, this is your second credited job as a composer.
Yeah.
You previously did a film with Mr. Scott Frank called A Walk Among the Tombstones. And now you've done this 7.5-hour limited series Western for Netflix called Godless. So, I mean, when he says to you, I've got this thing I'm doing and it's multi-part and it's 7.5 hours, what was the first thought that ran through your mind as a second-time movie composer?
Well, the first time he told me about it was back in 2003 or 4 when he was my guitar student. And I had no idea I'd ever be working with him as a composer at all. And that back then it was a story, it was a screenplay. And we got on and life happened, and eventually, and not to bore you with that stuff, but I got the opportunity to score A Walk Among the Tombstones for him in 2013 or so. The movie was released in 14, and it was an education. And so when this came about, he sent me the screenplay. It was still a screenplay in about November of 15. And I ended up writing music to the screenplay immediately. And then he told me it was going to be developed into a 7-part. And we always thought of it as a movie, never like as a series, just a movie that took its time to tell its story.
So you mentioned that he was your guitar student. That's how you guys met. Right. Was composing for film and television something that you had always planned on doing, or it just happened like that?
It was like a fantasy for me because I grew up in Central America, and I thought composers for film were born on a separate island, completely different from human beings. And as I started coming into, I became a composer for classical music, for performing art. And by that time, I was studying at USC to get my doctoral degree. He was my student, one of the many private students I had outside of just I was making money to, survive as I was a student. And I also, one of the great things that happened, though, is that I got a mentorship through USC with Randy Newman. And what that did was that it gave me the opportunity to see how things were, see the process of working and collaborating with other people, because to me, he was an icon and he probably had final say in everything. But I realized as I would go to the sessions he did, that the director would tell him, you know what, I'm not really liking this. Can we change it? And he's like, absolutely. I was like, dude, you're Randy Newman. Why are you saying what? And I realized that you're part of a collaborative team. And so I think by the time we got to the opportunity to score, I had been mentored in a way on not getting fired, if that makes any sense.
Right. So take us through your initial ideas for the music on this. You mentioned that you started writing to the script. So what were some of those initial sounds and themes like?
Oh yeah, the theme was pretty much early on as a reaction to the screenplay, and it was literally looking at. I wanted to get something that was simple. And I was a big fan of the iconic themes from like the 70s, like, TV shows specifically. There's one that I would say like the Rockford Files. I like 4 people probably know of it, but it's.
I know what you're talking about.
No. It's one of the coolest things ever, right? And I was a big fan of that stuff. A lot of the Mike Post music from the 70s, but also, of course, Jerry Goldsmith and John Williams. So we were looking for something that would be iconic, something that would be singable. And I wanted to capture that, a melody that could be very simple, but if you would put changes underneath it, it could change the tone and the feel. And basically what the theme does is that it sets up a question that hopefully at the beginning of each show teases the audience. And that question gets resolved at the end of the entire movie or story. In the last cue. That's the goal of it, and it was an accidental happening, but it turned out to find its own answer. And anyways, that's all I'll say, I think.
You also are trying to place people in a specific setting and time, the Old West. Can you talk about how you did that musically?
Oh man, it was definitely the biggest challenge was to look at the amazing repertoire that's out there for like some of the most iconic scores. Are the Western genre, you almost don't want to even tread upon it because there's Bernstein and Elmer, of course, and there's Morricone, and you can keep going, Bruce Broughton. It's just great composers that wrote that for that genre. And so what I wanted to do was try to find something that would actually honor it, but not necessarily borrow from it. And the Americana sound that really was part of the 50s, 60s, and even early 70s Westerns was very much based on a lot of what we conceived of as like the classical music of Aaron Copland, and that sound, that very expansive sound. So the challenge was trying to find something that would be that, but not that. And one of the basic things I found was that the harmonica would never work. No matter how much I tried, it was just, it would just immediately bring a lot of baggage with it. And that was the main thing, was to just try to avoid anything that would bring us into cliche world. So the hope was to build good melodies, and that could be as expansive as the visuals, you know, that I was getting to watch.
Well, I mean, one of the things that sets us apart, you know, from other Westerns to begin with is the fact that it has so many strong women at the center of it.
Yeah.
It's been described as a feminist Western. So I wonder, I mean, did that go into your thinking at all, or was that just not even a part of the ideas music?
Yeah, man, of course. I mean, you know, I was noticing the angle. I don't think so much it's a feminist Western in the sense that it just happens to have that aspect where this town full of women, you know, it was a town that became a matriarchal town because of the accident that happened where the miners were lost. That's based on historical fact. These things happened. But it's a great place to set story. And the story is a traditional Western. You know, you're going to have your shootout. You're going to have a duel at the end. You have your good guy, bad guy. And what was very interesting for me was really trying to get to write when I read the story of Mary Agnes and Callie, that relationship to me, which was super strong, I felt like it was almost like of the time that we're in. And it was a real, I wanted to make sure I honored that, and to get to write something for them that would describe the vulnerability of the character of Mary Agnes, because she's strong, but she's broken in a way to me. And we needed to kind of have a melody that felt like it had both. And that challenge was there. There was another character, Alice Fletcher, played fantastically by Michelle Dockery as well. And I wanted another thing that was strong, that was not, I don't know, the word is like, it's not feminine, but it would just be a strong theme, but that would belong to someone like her that had been through a lot. So
there's also this great relationship at the center of this series between Jeff Daniels and Jack O'Connell, this kind of surrogate father protege who are now fighting with each other. Can you talk a bit about how you captured that conflict?
Well, I think with Jeff Daniels, or the character Frank Griffin, I wanted to really kind of bring in a few things, and a lot of this talk that we're maybe even having has nothing to do with what I necessarily spoke with the director or Scott about, because for Scott, what matters is more than story, is character. You know, I see about, like, when you write something for the director and for producers, we have to address the tone musically and the character. But for the nerdy person inside, for the music composers or for people, that there was a lot of things that I tried to pull from, that as long as Scott never mentioned anything, we're good, you know? So like bees are something I brought in that were constantly represented in the screenplay. And I think they translated somewhat, but every time we had Frank Griffin, I would make sure to add the sound of bees to the cues, or something that he had done. Or so it's a subtle thing, but it really kind of makes you uneasy. The sound of bees makes you uneasy. So with Frank Griffin, I wanted to address that. Roy Goode was the main theme, was basically do 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 do. He also had a gift, you know, and with horses and with guns. So I wrote a theme for that. And I think when he's walking towards that final duel, you hear his gift theme. And he also had another theme, again, nerdy talk. He had a theme for like a variation on the theme, which was do 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 do, which was a flip of the actual theme. And that was really much when he would do something heroic, like when he was shooting Jeff Daniels specifically in Doubtful Canyon. You know, all of that stuff, you know, when he appears in the final episode and he walks out of the shadows, you hear that melody, which is the theme, sort of transformed. So anyways.
You also have to underscore the majesty of the landscape in a lot of instances. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I thought one of the coolest things was to get to work with Joy Adams, who played cello in the whole show, and for a few reasons. Is that she's very unassuming as a person. Most of her posts on Instagram are about her skiing and some music. You know, it's not like, and then, you know, because anyway, so but she played a lot about the personal, and I'm addressing her specifically because she she addressed a lot of the personal character stuff was guitar and cello. I even used harmonium as well to have this. It's a really cool, like I'm doing this with my hand because it's like a pump organ, and it sounds very organic and very maybe of the time, but that was always set against the orchestra, and the orchestra always served to give us that sense of breadth of landscape. So it, you know, setting a melody for violins and winds and brass, you know, would always grab from the intimate to the broad, and that was like the main thing we were looking for. So the visuals would be addressed musically just by the color of the orchestra would kick in at those moments. Hopefully that was the goal that we were going for.
And then underscoring the action sequences that are in the film. I mean, I think particularly about the climax. You know, there's also shootouts and things like that. Can you talk about finding the right kind of music to underscore that, and I mean, competing also with everything else that's going on there?
Right, and it's a great thing to say. There's not a lot of action in this movie, and because it's really all building to the end. You know, one of the cool set pieces was Doubtful Canyon, and I definitely wanted to set some things for that one that were addressing the visual. It was a canyon, and there's I know you're gonna laugh, but there's a TV show that my kids used to watch called The Backyardigans, and there's a song called "There's an Echo in the Canyon, and so there, I wrote a thing that went and it was kind of just based on that, and also of course Patton from Jerry Goldsmith, the idea of an echo, and that kind of repeats throughout that cue as a setting to help us understand where we are in location. But one of the cool things for the final action stuff was that we got Joy Adams and Andy Reiner, who played fiddle, and truly a fiddle player. And so other than the standard action fare that you have that really Anglo-American music sort of setting that is not necessarily of that time, but it was born out of that era. And so when you hear it, like, you know, when Roy Goode is doing his heroic stuff in the final action sequence, you will hear that sort of Anglo-American, like chopping on the violin, on the fiddle, and the theme played in a very Anglo-American way, which hopefully added the contrast again, the orchestral typical thing that you're supposed to hear. It's what we're kind of used to. As an audience, we're expecting to hear certain things, and you have to give them that. It's just working within those confines that you try to tell your story so it can be maybe better accepted, you know.
Mm-hmm. Talk a bit about your main title theme, the thing that we hear in all 7 episodes. Talk about how you came up with that.
Right. So the main title theme was really it's a 5-note theme. It was Godless, so the first thing I immediately thought was all the dark notes on the piano, which makes this point like the absence of light, if you will. So, and again, it was a very simple pentatonic theme that my kids could play. And I would actually, when I wrote it, I would ask my kids to sing it back, and they would sing it back. And I was like, okay, this is going somewhere. And it was, again, basically something that was trying to encapsulate as I felt like it was a question that we needed to set up for the audience to be involved. And like the 70s shows, I remember, like, and I got very lucky because a lot of television today doesn't get an opportunity to have a main title, and they have bumps, you know, where just the credits appear and that's it. So I took on that challenge with a lot of, I did my research, you know, I listened to everything I could, but at the end of the whole process, it was about finding something simple that you could sing back, that you could play on any instrument, and just develop harmonically the music underneath it to support that. So we could change it throughout, and it won't, every time the theme appears, it appears so much throughout the show, but it seems to never be invasive. It's never in your way. It's almost hopefully helping you tell the story.
Working with Scott Frank, I know you don't have anyone to compare him with yet, but I'm sure you will one day. What does he give you as a director that helps you with your work?
A career.
Well, there you go.
I don't know. He's probably, I said this before, but he's one of the greatest writers and storytellers in the industry. And if you go to Minority Report, Out of Sight, and you see how he writes, and I did say this in some other conversation I had, it's I love reading his emails because I like how he thinks, his structure, his mind. And so one thing that we do have is a very, very brutal approach to our a conversation. At least he is with me. And I'm very receptive. I like brutal. I like being honest feedback. I'm not a fan of like, that's pretty good. I'm not into that. I don't like this. And he's very good about telling me what doesn't work. And that's one of the things that we did. And because we've had this unorthodox process in which I'll grab his screenplay and I'll make a QuickTime of it and score the QuickTime. So we get to make a lot of mistakes early on. And so he'll like, one of the things I found out, it was about slide guitar, even though it's in the theme, it's not in the show almost at all. And harmonica. Like I had harmonica in my early sketches, and they would always come back with, it's just something's off. And what was off was that it was too close to, you know, the predecessors. So you had to honor it without being it in a way. But yeah, so, I mean, it's just a dream come true, man. To be talking to you right now is like, I'm in a Netflix studio right now.
I'm glad to be a part of your dream come true.
You are.
Well, Carlos, thank you so much, and congratulations on your work. It was fantastic talking to you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. What a privilege. Thank you, man.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.